And those who can't make it, look at the recording. So thanks for joining me, guys. We're going to talk about effective leadership today. I'm just get my share screen going. That's not what you want to see. That's what you want to see. Okay. Understanding your talk style. So why is this important? Ironically, I was just listening to a podcast this morning that talked about how when we talk with others, we are automatically trying to convince them to see things the way we see them, and we approach the logical brain as opposed to that intuitive part of us. So let's get everybody in here. All right. Perfect. Thanks for joining, guys. Welcome in. Welcome in. Feel free to put your cameras on if you'd like or off. It doesn't matter to me. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session. If you have questions as we go, put them in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on that as well. And we will get started. So effective leadership, understanding your talk style. We're going to be diving into the DISC model, the DISC framework today a little bit, and you're going to walk away with a few things. One, you'll be able to understand your natural talk style better, and maybe even your adapted talk style. You'll also then be able to identify this in others so you can improve on your influence and get things done faster. Now, one of the gaps, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because when it comes to having conversations with individuals, we tend to think that as we package up our beautiful words and we send our message across the sound waves, that our intention is wrapped around those words as if it's a gift, and that will go into their ears and settle into their hearts, and they will receive us in the way we intend them to do so. But the problem is their experience of us is based on how they see us, hear us, their experiences, their culture, their expectations. And so what we think we're projecting into the world is not always landing the way we want it to land. And you have likely experienced that already. One of the things that trips us up, and maybe you can let me know in the chat if you have heard this before, is the golden rule. This very well-intentioned rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. And what this really is talking to is broader concepts, such as, I want to be treated with respect, so I'm going to treat you with respect. So I'm going to treat you the way I want to be treated. I want you to see me as a professional. I'm going to see you as a professional. So these are bigger concept words and values, but we don't get micro enough to actually understand what does respect look like and sound like to you, because that might be very different than what it looks and sounds like to me. There will likely be some shared elements, but there will be some differences that come up when we get a little bit more granular into what that concept word really looks like. And so we're kind of out here like in the Wild West, living by this rule, living on the edge of our seat, thinking that we've got it all figured out. But the golden rule, as well-intentioned as it is failing us because it's leading to the golden mistake, assuming others think and act the same way we do. And this is often, I'm going to give you some examples here on this slide because this one's so critical. It's often when we come into challenge with somebody, we've got a difficult conversation and we don't know how to deal with it. We think if they just knew a little bit more, they've got a knowledge gap, they have a skill gap. If they understood the science here, then maybe they would see it the way I see it. And I don't know any time where someone has presented me with more logic where I have gone, well, thank you for that information. I have now completely changed my mind. Because you can't reason with somebody if they haven't got to that conclusion through their own reasoning. And this podcast I listened to this morning really kind of highlighted to me and emphasized why understanding our talk style is so critical, because we all have default patterns and behaviors that might be getting in the way of our success. So I'm going to give you an example here. I was a nurse clinician before, had students in clinical, and if I go by the golden rule, I set up all of my students the same way. When we go into the patient's bedside, I am there to support you, champion you, and I'll give you feedback afterwards. Unless in that moment there's something critical, what I will do is I will ask a question like, hey, did you happen to bring in an alcohol swab with you? Or I'm just going to take over and say, you know what, you look like you're having a challenge. Let me just do this part for you. to indicate that they've missed something important in order to save face in front of the patient. That being said, that's how I would expect people to treat me, because that's the golden rule, right? I would want you to intervene if I'm doing something wrong. Fast forward to COVID, and I'm now working at the front station of the hospitals, teaching people to hand wash and put on their masks, something I do all the time. And after this patient came in and I've done the process and they've walked away, the person who's shadowing me and teaching me to do my job goes, "You've done something wrong." And they allowed me to make that mistake in their eyes and let this patient walk into the hospital without having the correct procedure of washing hands, putting their mask on per what they had put out. I was mortified because I wanted her to treat me the way I would treat my students. Intervene. Don't let somebody go through here with a mistake. Don't create a situation where things aren't ideal. And so that really kind of hit home as I was thinking about this podcast, what we're talking about today, the golden rule. And what this podcast was suggesting is that, and I really like it, so I want to share it with you here today. It's just added fresh to this webinar, is that when we try to convince somebody to adopt a new way of thinking or being, we tend to go with the logic. Instead, what we need to be doing is talking to that intuitive, that emotional part, the limbic system, where our amygdala is, our fight or flight response. Because our amygdala, our emotional system, responds to psychological threats in the same way our body responds to physical threats. And so your talk style, how you are approaching problems, how you deal with people, how you consider processes and policies, all of those things are giving clues as to where your priority is. And that might be causing some problems, and it may also be why you're successful. So let's dive into that a little bit more. The rule I'd like you to consider for today is the platinum rule. Now, if you've heard of this one before, great, it's a good reminder. And if you haven't and it's new to you, it shifts away from treating others the way you want to be treated and focuses on treating others the way they want to be treated. Now, today's presentation, while we're going to help you identify your talk style and where you're more naturally inclined so that you can use that information, I suspect that this platinum rule is not new to you. If you think back even to your younger days when maybe you wanted the car, the keys to the car, you needed money from mom or dad, you likely can think back to how you adapted your talk style to get what you needed, to influence them to get to the easy yes. So much like you would change how you speak in those situations, we're going to learn how you would use that same strategy and put some framework around it and some languaging around it so you can use this in the workplace. Now, to practice the platinum rule, which comes from DISC specifically, you need to learn how to read people. And I'm going to teach you a process, a really simple process to read people. And it involves listening to what they're talking about, how they're talking, and the words that they're using. It's not overly complicated, but I'm just setting the stage here so that when we get to this part of it, you'll be able to tune in and see in yourself and others what those styles are and then how to adapt, just like you did with mom and dad, to get to the fast yes. So there's 3 outcomes that you can get when you use DISC. The first one is you're going to understand yourself and others better. As individuals, you and I are unique. We have personalities, we have behaviors, and those actually can be positioned on the chart of DISC, which has been used worldwide by millions of people. And it is fairly accurate in terms of helping us identify and predict reasonably what somebody might do when we talk with them. Also helps us to understand how we might be approaching different problems and people through these habitual ways that we have learned. With that, though, even though we have patterns that we can predict, we are not locked in. And that's a really important piece to understand with DISC. We're not locked into any set style of behavior. We have a natural style and we have an environmental style. So we do adapt. And understanding the differences and those preferences becomes a guide for your relational situation. The second outcome that will improve is identifying behavioral patterns. So that means the wants, the needs, the desires, the motivation of yourself and others around you. And we find that by listening to how they're communicating those wants, those needs, and those expectations. And once we know where they fit in this framework, we can anticipate how to approach them, how to uncover those motives and use them in order to inspire them to move where we want them to go. So our talk style has a lot to do with understanding our natural and then how do we adapt it. The third outcome is that we can adapt our styles, and adaptability is huge throughout this whole thing. I've probably said it 3 times already, and I'll say it again at the end, is talking about how we adapt. When we adapt, we're able to reduce tension. Now, when you're in conversation with somebody, your desire to adapt will depend on 3 factors: who you're talking with, what the topic is, and how involved you are in, or invested you are in the outcome. If you're not invested in the outcome, the person you're talking with is not someone that's going to be in your life for a long term or have a lot of influence, you may not adapt. You may just stay in your natural style and stand to your values and your beliefs and your expectations. And that's okay. But understanding that is the critical piece. So before we get into the framework, I just want to let you know what DISC is and what DISC is not. DISC is a simple, practical tool, universally applied, so across cultures, across genders. It's been used worldwide. It's a model that helps us build stronger relationships and improve our communication skills. It is needs motivated. So what does that mean? Let's say you've been assigned to mentor a new employee and they're struggling. Right now in the chat, if you were to have somebody who was struggling, what would your first instinctive natural need be to help that employee? Go ahead and put something in the chat there as to what's coming up for you as you think about that. I want to make sure I see everybody here. There we go. Would your need be to jump in, take over, and finish the task so we can get things done? Would you feel like you were driven to inspire them, pump them up, encourage them? You've got this. Would you want to slow down and check in with them? Just get curious about what's going on. What's the roadblock here? Would you need to refer to a policy manual maybe and say, hey, listen, why don't we go back and look at the procedure, review this, make sure it's all correct, and we'll come back and do this again. When you think of those 4 scenarios, where are you most likely to be? Slow down and check in with them from Amanda. Yeah. Simona, I'd ask and try to notice what are their preferred ways to understand and remember things, processes. Great, so we're identifying their behaviors. Those needs show up actually in our behaviors and in theirs. So these are the clues that we're going to use in our observable behaviors and emotions. So let's go back to that struggling employee. And you find that you're just going to jump in, take over, solve it. You can already tell my words are short, tense, curse, right? It's like fast. There's impatience. There may be some anger and frustration here. If your need was to champion them, like, come on, you got this. You hear how my voice goes up. So these are pieces of clues in our talk style as to who people are. So you hear this lightening of the voice, this fast paced, yes, come on, you got this, we can do this, right? Very encouraging. If your need was to slow down and check in with them, you're likely to be very calm and not have a lot of range in your expression, so as not to alert them that maybe you're worried about them, but to keep steady, to create an environment where they can then explore. And if your need was to go back to the process, the emotion might be concern for getting it wrong. We don't want to be considered incompetent. So these show up in the words we use and the behaviors and the emotions that we display. The other thing about DISC is it's a combination of natural, so who you are at birth, who you are when there's no stressors around you, no challenges around you, and also who you become in those situations. So our environment. If you go home at the end of the day and you're energized and you're still ready to go, you are likely working in your most natural style at work. You've got a really great pairing. If when you go home at the end of the day, you are drained, like, oh my God, that took every ounce out of me to do that work today, you might be working in an adapted style, meaning you've had to lower some of your natural tendencies and raise up some of your less natural tendencies to be efficient and productive in the workplace. And that's important information to know, because if that's what's happening in your workplace, we can then adjust and put in some buffer zones to help you recover and replenish throughout. It's just as important to know what DISC is not. It's not an indicator of your values or your intelligence or your education, any of that, okay? So let's get into the 4 core styles. You may have heard of these before, and that's great. If you haven't, this is new, this is awesome. But there's 4 core styles in DISC, which makes it really simple, and that's why it's so practical. There's a lot of assessments out there. All of them have great information. Some of them are a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more wired in than I am. The Myers-Briggs, the ENs, the INJs, I don't understand that whole system. It's a little bit more complex for me. This is simple. And there's clues in each letter. D, dominance. You likely already have an image of somebody who might be a high D. I, influence. Think of the people who are life of the party. S, steadiness. These are the ones who will support you and make sure everything's in place. And C is conscientiousness, rules, policies. Are you picturing some people already just based on those 4 styles? You likely are. Now, when you think of these 4 styles, I want you to know this is high level. This is an overview of what these styles mean. We, in fact, are a blend of all of those. I have done several of these DISC assessments, and I always come back as either an SIC or an ISC. And the lettering, the order of those letters just means which one's more prominent, which one's secondary. And when you have, there's an expression that's more likely and less likely. So D, I didn't even mention because it's my lowest trait. It's like below the line, as we call it. So we're just going to give you your dominant number 1 today. And then if you're interested in doing a more detailed assessment to find out your unique blend and how all of this works together, we can set you up at the end. I'll share with you how you can get a DISC assessment, a DISC debrief, or if you want to do a workshop or training for your team, we can talk about that as well. But we're going to look at the area of focus now for each of these 4 core styles. And as I go through, if there's anything that you resonate with, feel free to put it in the chat. Any questions, put them in there as well, and we'll come back to that. So D for dominance. This is really speaking to how people address problems and challenges. Typically, a D dominance is direct, decisive, and doers. And we're going to share with you how you can find yours after this section. I is for influence. This is about how do you handle situations that involve people and contacts. S speaks to our steadiness. How do people demonstrate pace, which is speed? How quickly do they accomplish things or engage with others? How slow, methodical are they? And what's the consistency? Steadiness is all about consistency. And then C is about procedures and constraints. So how do we react to procedures and constraints? For me, I will share with you, they feel like a straitjacket. And so I don't like a lot of rules, which is a clue that I might not be a high C, which I already indicated, right? But it's part of my skill set. I can get into that rules area. Now, before we dive into the tendencies and the behaviors and the emotions you would see in each of these quadrants, we're going to get a sense as to where you are first. So here's the activity. Grab yourself a pen and piece of paper and just draw like a big old plus sign. We're going to do 4 quadrants. I'll give you a second there to get that. We're going to identify your style, and it's really easy. It's really quick. It's 2 questions. And you'll have a really great starting point as to what's important to you, what matters, and then how do we adapt that to get what we want from our relationships or your leadership. We're going to look at the long axis first. And you'll see here that this is called openness, which is how much do you prioritize being open? Do you share a lot about your life, or do you tend to just lock it down? In this case, if you are very open, you talk about your feelings, your emotions, what you're struggling with, you would be on the very open side, which is down here. And you'll see that there's numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. A 4 is very open. I'm an open book. You hear people say that. You know everything about me. I don't have any secrets. That would be a 4. Somewhat open is you prefer to be open, but there are times when you are more selective and you don't share everything. On the other side, on the upper part of this line, we have a 2 and a 1. 2 is somewhat guarded, meaning I'll share a little bit, but I'm more guarded than I am open. And number 1 is I'm all about the task. I don't need to hear about your day. I don't need to talk about your feelings. Let's just get things done. That would be more task-oriented, highly guarded, or very open, people-oriented. Let me know in the chat where you put yourself, and I'm going to share with you where I self-assess myself. My self-assessment is I'm almost a 4. I am an open book. I share my life's experiences, my failures, my successes, and I still hold some stuff back. There are things that I just will never share with anybody, okay? But my self-assessment is down there near a 4. So I'm on the very open people side. In the chat, let me know where you have self-assessed yourself. Self-assessed yourself. Whew. Now, I want to share there's no right or wrong. These are just who you are. And even if we were to be the same number, say you were to say that you're also almost a 4, we may decide that what is shareable is different. We may think who we share with is different. And so there will still be unique differences among us. The second one, as you've got your pace there, the second one is about pace. How quick are you to engage with situations and struggles? You can think of this as your internal motor. The last slide here, when you think about your task or people, you can think about this as your internal compass. Am I more naturally driven towards getting things done and being productive? Or am I more naturally driven towards people and relationships? So got our compass, and now we're going to check about our pace. Our pace is how quick we are to engage. So if you are like a racehorse or a hot rod car and your engine's always revved up, ready to go, you're going to be direct, outgoing, fast paced. If you're a little bit more horse and buggy, let's take things slow, let's look at things, we're more on the indirect, reserved, slow pace side. So A, very indirect, very slow. I need to think about things. This might also show up in people being extremely patient, very cooperative, but their approach to change is very methodical and slow. They need time. If they're in a meeting, they are less likely to ask questions unless they are for clarifying what they've already heard, and they follow the rules. On the opposite side, D, very direct. This is someone who approaches change quickly, like let's go, let's be spontaneous. Rules are just a guideline. They're meant to be stretched, poked, broken, okay? And you notice even the change in my tone, and that's how we find clues in our talk style. Reserved, slow pace, slower tone, thinks a lot, big pauses. Direct, outgoing, let's do it. We're fast paced, we're talking, we're high energy. And so there's a difference in our talk as well. So as you position yourself on this quadrant, let me know in the chat where you find yourself in terms of pace. Am I an A or a B? So on the indirect, a little bit slower, need my time, cooperative, patient. Or am I a C, D, a little bit more spontaneous, more willing to share my ideas, a little bit more let's stretch the rules kind of person? You let me know. And then I'll share with you where I am here. So I consider myself to be between a C and a D. I am somewhat fast, and yet there are times where I will take my time. And that's because of my unique blend. Remember, I said we're focusing on the high level D, I, S, and C. But through my assessment, I am both an I and an S. I's are fast, S's are slow. So internally, I got a little bit of conflict about how fast I do things sometimes. So that's why I put myself between C and D. Now, what I want you to do next is just to draw a line to connect those two dots, and you're going to find out which quadrant you are in, and we're going to make sense of this. So I want to thank you. So you're the same, a CD, and you said you were a 2 about your own things happening in your life, and a 3 about others. Beautiful. Environment changes how we see things. So remember, you're not like locked in, we do adapt. All right, so where does this put us on the big old chart of disc? You can see for me, I'm an influence. You can let me know, where were you? Are you a dominance, an influence, a steadiness, or a conscientiousness? Now, a dominance is all about task and fast. Influence is all about fast, but people. Steadiness is about people, but they're going to slow down, take their time, get to know you. Conscientiousness, slow and task. So as you think about this, I'm going to give you a scenario now. If you had a policy that you needed revised, who would you assign that to? A D, an I, an S, or a C? I'm an I, and I will share with you, if you were to assign me a policy, I would do it, but it would be painful because that's not my strength. It's something I would probably grate my teeth over. I would procrastinate like heck because it's effort for me. So I would not be your first choice. You would want to assign that to a C because they're about policies, rules, procedures. They would probably salivate if you gave them that task. Now, how about if you wanted to solve a backlog? There's a lot of paperwork and the sales team just cannot get out there and make sales. We need somebody to solve this problem. That would be a D. D is about task and fast. We got a problem, we need to solve it. If you needed someone to support a new employee and integrate them into the team, that might be your S. And if you wanted somebody to plan the employee appreciation event, well, that would be me. Heck yes, I'm all about, let's aspire to help others feel like they belong. So you can see when you know your talk style, where your strengths are, then when tasks and opportunities come along, you get to decide what's going to be best for you. So let's dive in now into some of the focuses and the emotions. If you identified as a D, as a primary focal point, you love problems and challenges. In fact, the 3 words that Ds love are choices, challenges, and control. They need to solve problems. They need to have authority and autonomy. Don't want to micromanage a D. The emotion you will see is, remember that employee that's struggling? The D is the one that jumps in and solves the problem and just takes care of it because they're task, outcome, motivated. You might feel impatience with them. You may notice anger with them. Their fear is being taken advantage of or having a lack of control. Many of my clients actually come back with a high D. It's really ironic for me because apparently only 13 to 15% in the world are high D individuals. I got a lot of them. And this is me, focusing on people and connections. My need is social relationships and a friendly environment. I am driven by that. Optimism and trust are the feelings that I love to hold on to. I have a fear of being left out and a loss of social approval. And that employee that was struggling, I'd be the one that was championing them and saying, hey, no, you got this. Totally believe in you. Let's just figure it out. I will get you through this, right? That's your high I. If you're a high S, your talk style is slower. I don't know if you just noticed that with the high I, I'm like, yeah, come on, let's go. S, slower, consistent, not a lot of range in when they talk to you. They're focused on keeping the status quo. They love being able to predict what's going to happen. So they like systems. Their need is for systems, teams, and a stable environment. Their emotions, patience, like no other. Now remember, I said I'm an IS or an SI. I had a grievance in the workplace for 4 years before I said enough was enough. That's your S. Your S will put everyone else's needs ahead of others to make sure that they have what they need to be successful. I'm not saying all S's will wait 4 years, but that's a great indicator that your style is an S. If you are so incredibly patient that you're willing to let others have what they need before you get what you need. That's that patience, non-expression, low range. Their fear is sudden change and a loss of stability and security. If you resonated with the high C, your need is procedures and constraints. Rules, rules, rules. Policies and procedures light you up. The more data there is to analyze, the more we can be informed. The emotion that drives them is fear or concern that we're not going to get it right. So with that struggling employee, that's the person who would say, let's go back to the policy. Let's review this, make sure we have all the steps, all the resources before we try again. The fear is being criticized for not having it right and a loss of accuracy and quality. They love excellence, high standards. Now, understanding these elements of the styles can further help us clarify what each person needs. What do you need? And as we go through these, share with me in the chat some of those insights you're getting as we talk about the style, the behaviors and the needs, and the indicators that help you recognize, oh, this is me. I know I'm fast. I'm about people. I champion them. I support them. And I recognize now that that is why some of my own struggles and challenges in my life have been present, because 4 years for a grievance caused me a lot of stress after 4 years, and even in between, because I was thinking, how come they don't value me? But now I know, because my style, my talk style allowed that situation to happen. So what clues does your talk style give us? Are you fast, slow, people, task? Now remember, this is high level again, and it is really just a quadrant we're putting you into today. You're not locked in, because we are not locked in. But then how can you use this with those in your workplace? What benefits do you see? And feel free to come off your, if you want to talk, you can unmute yourself, or you can just go in the chat, that's fine. There's one more section I'm going to cover. And that's really about what the DISC report can show you, how deep it can go. Simona, I'm thinking of all the blends that I or people I know may fall into. Quite a mess. Yeah, well, this is great. That's so many opportunities now for you to quickly identify, okay, oh, they're working from a strong C right now. They need rules and procedures. Let me slow down and check in. Have I been clear as a leader? Have I been clear with my expectations? Have I given them enough time to consider it, because they're slow? And if you're a high D, for example, you're fast. So when you know your own talk style, you get to adapt. Again, there's that word adaptability, because that's what really is the critical element, ingredient to success. Highly adaptable people determine what types of behavior are most appropriate in specific situations. Talk is a big piece of that. Your communication style indicates where you are on that chart. And then if I can have a conversation with you and pick that out right away, I adapt my approach to you and I can speak your language. So Simona, tell me which one you were, D, I, S, or C? I remember you saying the numbers, but I don't know if I put the numbers down in my notes here. Let's see, you were a 2, 3. Okay, so you're bouncing between task and people. And you were a somewhat DSC is what you think? Okay, so D you think is your top one, right? So if I came to you, I'd be like, all right, Simona, we got this problem. We need to figure out how to solve the issue that's causing the salespeople to have a standstill. I'm wanting you to go and figure this out. Boom, you're like, awesome, a challenge, I love it. You've given me total autonomy. I'm going to come back to you. Yeah, so the right order is through your disc assessment. Let me share with you what comes inside there. Quad polar. Yes, 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 because we're a blend of them all. Here's what you get in a disc report. The first thing is a high-level overview of your natural style and your adapted style, all in one place, all in this beautiful graph. Now, if you do a team, you can chart your entire team on here and you can quickly see where some of those struggles and successes might lie. You also get your style. And so you'll see there's two graphs here. Your natural style. Who are you when there's no stressors or challenges around? And who are you in your current environment? Now, remember, I said I'm an IS. I is fast in people, S is slow in people. So internally, sometimes I have challenges making a decision. I'm always people focused. I'm always people first. That's a given. But then it's about all the other elements that I get slower on is cause challenges in the workplace. Because I'm an entrepreneur, my workplace matches my ability right now. However, when I was in nursing and clinical education and in the military, you can imagine I had to dampen my eye. Can't be so rah, rah, let's do it, guys. You need to be a little bit more conscientious, policies, rules, get things done. And so there would have been more effort for me to express those parts of who I am in the military. And then the third thing it does, it gives you tools. So it actually shows you where there might be potential problems in terms of tension in relationships and tips on how to adjust your style in order to make that work. Now, I want to share with you, before we get to the Q&A here, I just want to share with you that if you want to get a DISC assessment or you want to do a DISC and a debrief or book a webinar, those are all possible. I'll put in the chat. The talkshop.ca is where you can sign up for a DISC or a DISC and debrief. If you prefer to do a workshop, then you can book into my calendar, and I've got, I think, a link here for you. There we go. Oh, we'll do this. Currently, they are at promotional pricing, but that will be ending after today's webinar. So tomorrow I'll be changing the prices back up to normal for the DISC and DISC debrief. There we go. And then if you want to book and talk about how to do a workshop, we can do that as well. But this is the portion now where I'm dedicating to you to answer any questions you have. So feel free to either put them in the chat, come off, you can put your video and your mic on, and we will talk about those. And actually, I'm going to end the recording. I'll stop my share.